So welcome back, everybody. We're here in the studio with Mr. Ray Bassett yet again.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Ben.
So a lot has happened since we last spoke, including, I believe, you have a very significant announcement to make. But before we jump into that, I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the Catherine Zappone situation, the so-called Zappone Gate, as people are calling it. I believe you put in a Freedom of Information request regarding that whole situation. What happened there? What did you find?
Well, for a start, I worked in the Department of Foreign Affairs for many, many years, and I still have fond memories of it. And one of the things we have managed to do in Ireland, and they've adopted it in a lot of other countries now, is they've gradually eliminated the political appointees in it, where you create a job for somebody you want to get rid of. So when they proposed putting Catherine Zappone into the permanent representation in New York, I felt that this would damage the permanent representation in New York, and it smacked of cronyism, and it seemed as if the proper procedures hadn't been used. And I was actually contacted by a few of my former colleagues who were outraged by it, and a lot of my former colleagues like to stay below the radar line. So it was actually suggested that I'd take a lead, and I did, and I put in a request, and I think it was the first request for a Freedom of Information Act to find out how did this come about, because it seems so unorthodox. And I'm told the reaction inside Ivy House was one of panic the minute it arrived. Now, a lot of some journalists came in afterwards, but it was quite clear from the very start that this was something that the department was not keen on, and the minister in particular was not keen on the background being uncovered.
I believe you said that it seemed from the request that you got back that the department was clear that this was sort of a favour.
It was. I mean, first of all, the department refused my Freedom of Information request and went on trying to use a procedure which essentially shields the minister. And in fact, I notice even the Taoiseach is now saying that the Freedom of Information Act may have to be changed because of what happened. But it was clear that from the exchanges that this was something the minister asked for. It wasn't something that the department wanted or cared about, just reading the exchanges between New York and Dublin. And, it was exactly what it is, a political favour, a bit of cronyism. And, I think Simon Coveney and the Taoiseach would have been an awful lot better to come clean at the very start and sort of say, OK, we made a mistake, and we're pulling back. But the kind of defensive and narky kind of responses they gave to everybody, and then trying to shield from the Freedom of Information request, I think that all rebounded very heavily against them, as we can see.
What do you think of the fact that even supposedly opposition parties like the Labour Party, while they said that they didn't have confidence in the government or Minister Simon Coveney, I believe Labour leader Alan Kelly, he said words to the effect of, look, Ireland has bigger things to worry about and we're not going to prioritise. And I mean, as an outsider looking in, you'd think, well, if you're the opposition and you have a chance to justifiably nail a major government minister to the wall, would you not take that opportunity and go in for this golden chance to get rid of somebody who you believe is incompetent? It seemed like a very strange thing for an opposition party to do,
Well, I'd agree with you. The Labour Party traditionally was a working class party which stood up for working people and tried to attack privilege. But in this case, the whole case reeks of privilege and entitlement. The only explanation I have for the Labour Party's behaviour is maybe that Ivana Bacik was associated with Catherine Zappone and her party. But also, let's be honest, the Labour Party's aspirations now is to be a small player in a coalition. So I think Alan Kelly, who used to be known as Machine Gun Kelly, has toned down everything with the idea that, I'm not going to alienate the big parties because at some stage I may be invited in to be a minister. Maybe I'm wrong, but that would seem to me to be a part of the explanation.
As a diplomat yourself, do you think people kind of understand the full ramifications of what happened, or do you think there's more there's more at play that you would have a unique perspective on?
Well, I think what had at play is certainly the damage that has been done, not only to the Irish Foreign Service, but within the government. I mean, it was quite clear that they were treating Fianna Fáil and the Taoiseach with contempt. I mean, I've often been in a position where you are getting a memo over to government in the last day. But, you know, if you had a memo for government, you would normally ring your colleagues in other departments, and you would also go down to the advisor and say, make sure that they know this, because the last thing you want to do with a Taoiseach is present them with a kind of a depth charge at a meeting. It seems extraordinarily discourteous and to the operation of the Taoiseach's department and to the Taoiseach that wasn't lifted. And I think that's the damage. And the other thing is that what this has done is it is bringing politics more and more into disrepute. Politics is a noble profession if people are in it for the good and betterment of the people. But if you're in it where you're trying to fix up jobs for former politicians who've been rejected by the electorate, then I think, you know, you're not exactly bringing a good name into the whole art of politics and government.
What do you think of, I think it was Micheál Martin's quote? He said something to the effect of the whole Zappone Gate situation, he thinks has brought the government closer together, you know, to the contrary, that, oh no, it hasn't caused stress fractures in the coalition. We're actually thick as thieves and we're getting on better than ever because of the whole experience.
I think it's brought him closer to Fine Gael, but I don't think, you know, I have a lot of friends in Fianna Fáil. I don't think it's brought Fianna Fáil closer to Fine Gael. I think there's seething anger in Fianna Fáil, particularly in the parliamentary party, about how they've been treated. And I think, you know, it hasn't done Micheál Martin's leadership any good whatsoever to be now to the point where he's, you know, sounding almost more Fine Gael than Fine Gael, and you know, defending Catherine Zappone from appearing before the elected representative of the people to explain why this happened, and you know, and essentially make democracy work. I honestly think Micheál will be much better off, you know, becoming a leader of Fianna Fáil and not appear to be so afraid of an election or the government coming down. I mean, if you're not prepared to walk away under any conditions, the other side will walk all over you. It's the same in negotiations. When you go into negotiations, even if you want this to succeed very badly, there has to be a point you have to say, like, it's not worth it anymore. And you have to have a red line somewhere there where you can walk away. And unfortunately, the Taoiseach at the moment doesn't appear to have a red line with Fine Gael, and they could do or the Greens, and they could do literally anything as long as he can stay in the position of Taoiseach, which is a sad state of affairs.
So we discussed earlier the idea that people going into politics should go in with noble intentions, and I believe you have an announcement to make in that area. I'm wondering if maybe for our audience.
Yes, Ben, I've decided to stand for the vacant seat in the Dublin University by-election, and again, I'm not standing to create a career for myself. I'm standing because I want to essentially use my experience to hold the government to account, and also to bring a point of view which is essentially that I do not want Ireland's sovereignty to be further eroded unless there's a very, very good reason for it. And I don't think the electorate ever really get that choice when it comes to. And the third reason is that I want to keep the government or their supporters their hands off the university seats, because they were established as seats where people who wouldn't normally be elected in the Dáil could stand. And if the political parties or their surrogates take it over, there's no point in university seats.
So you say you want to retain Irish sovereignty, by which I presume you mean the European Union. I know you're a known Eurosceptic. So it's my job to try and poke holes and find angles that the audience might be asking. So do you not think that a Trinity electorate or a Dublin University electorate would be quite pro-EU? And I mean, what do you think of running on a platform like that in this type of a constituency?
Well, I'm very pro-European, but I'm anti-federalist state, and I think that's much more popular than people say. I believe Trinity electors, which are brilliant people, of course, since I'm appealing to them, are an intelligent bunch. But, you know, I have rarely met people who are in favour of further and further diminutions of our sovereignty. I mean, the way we're going, it seems to be that, you know, our Oireachtas, our democratic institutions, will end up as county councils, not deciding anything of major import. And if you watch some of the Dáil debates, the standard, and it's not so much in the Senate, but the Dáil debate, the standard is pathetic. And they're not discussing anything that of major significance a lot of the time, because most of the decisions have been taken by an unelected group in Brussels. Now, I was quite content with a European Economic Community, which we were in before, and I believe very strongly in cooperation, often social cooperation and economic cooperation. But I do not want to see our hard-won independence thrown away. It's as simple as that.
What do you think of EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's recent remarks that Europe should be striving towards some kind of a European army? I believe Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron have made similar remarks in the past, and so they're saying that in the wake of US President Joe Biden's disastrous handling of Afghanistan, this underscores the need for Europe to form its own defense forces, so to speak, and have the capability to protect itself in the event of geopolitical turbulence. What would you say to that?
I say what I said in the tweets that I put out. It's time to send for the people with the white coats. I mean, did they know why Afghanistan was such a disaster? Did they know why Libya, why Iraq is in such a situation? The idea that the Europeans would put together an intervention force to intervene in areas around the world so that the European Union can project its global power is just bordering on the edge of lunacy. I mean, the Americans are pulling out of Afghanistan for a particular reason. The reason is that after 20 years it's not working. You cannot impose Western society and values of ourselves on top of a population which doesn't want it. I mean, I listened to an American general talking the other day, and he said it hasn't got through that no matter how much we dislike the Taliban, they have massive support in the rural areas. To a Westerner that seems inconceivable, but we can't go in and tell these people the way to live. And that's really what the European Union is talking about, an intervention force. They're talking about being able to intervene in places like Somalia, in Niger, in Mali. At this stage, I don't think there's 2% in the population in Ireland who think that's a good idea.
Well, what would you think of such a force for the defence of Europe at a continent-wide level in the event that, I know the big fear in the European Union is people talk about Russia all the time. What if the Russians tried to move on the east with the Ukraine things, or China, or who knows who it could be, that Europe should be able to stand on its own feet militarily? What would you say to such a person? Maybe not for intervention, but for defence.
Well, I do believe that, we should cooperate and talk to each other. But, there is a tendency among the sort of the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called them, to build up the enemy. I mean, if you look at the military potential of Russia versus even the combined forces of Western Europe, I mean, apart from the nuclear threat, there isn't a great threat. There are border disputes around in Eastern Europe, particularly where there are Russian minorities. And I would say to European countries, you should treat your Russian minority well. You're not helping the situation by refusing to give them citizenship and things like that. That's not in any way to be an apologist for Putin and things like that. But I think they are building up the threat of Russia and China. And it has to be watched to a degree that's well out of proportion with reality. Because remember, there's huge economic interests in the industrial military complex and want to essentially build a much bigger armaments industry in Europe. When you look at what the United States has spent in Afghanistan, I think 2.3 trillion, 2.7 trillion, and if they even spent 1 billion in El Salvador, the problem might have solved the problems of El Salvador. Spending this money on military operations, I'm not very, very keen on. I do believe we need to keep in contact and we need to monitor the threats. But we need to monitor the threats in a realistic way, not as a way of suddenly announcing we want a whole new kind of division of weapons. And in Ireland, I don't honestly feel threatened by Putin or by Xi at the moment.
So why did you choose the Seanad to run? I know there's a vacancy, obviously, but I suppose the question that some people might be asking is why now and why this election? Potentially there was the election last year for the Dáil. There's been other opportunities. So why this moment and why this seat, do you think?
Well, I did think of running the Seanad the last time because I think, I'm not trying to create a career for myself. And if I stood at being independent, what I was looking for is a platform to scrutinise legislation and to speak and to raise ideas. And the Seanad is an ideal place for that. It's also the electorate. The electorate is essentially dispersed around the world. I spend a lot of my time abroad, and I would have a lot of contacts and friends in places like America, the United States, Britain, Australia, Canada. And I felt that, I would like to speak on behalf or help the Irish diaspora. I spent a lot of time on that area, and I'm delighted that Senator Billy Lawless, who is the first diaspora senator, is backing my campaign. And that was the reason I picked the Seanad. It was also the opportunity, Ben. And I think I'd have a better chance in the Seanad than I would in a huge crowded election in Dublin West, where I'd be up against Leo Varadkar. Maybe I'll take him on later.
Absolutely. You actually, before this interview, you were showing me a list of some of the people who have endorsed you, and it was a lot of quite prestigious people. I was actually kind of surprised. Who were some of the examples again? You named Billy Lawless, was it?
Senator Billy Lawless, and because when I was in charge of the Irish government's policy towards the diaspora, so I got to know a lot of people abroad, including Billy, well before he became a senator. I've got General John de Chastelain. I'm very proud of getting General John de Chastelain, because John became a good friend, but John probably, of the outsiders, probably the most influential outsider. He co-chaired the talks, and remember, he was head of the decommissioning body which removed paramilitary weapons from the North, and everybody in the North has huge respect for him. I've also got Christy Cooney. Christy is former President Ir Uachtaráin of the GAA, and because sometimes people misunderstand when I say that we should have treated Brexit differently and we should maintain our relations with the United Kingdom. It doesn't mean that I'm any less of a patriot than anyone else. And I think having people like Christy Cooney, also delighted to have Cormac Lucy, and of course my good friend Tim Pat Coogan, who's easily the most successful non-fiction writer in Ireland. I've got people right across the spectrum. Bruce Arnold, who would certainly be completely different from Tim Pat Coogan. But one other person who was very important to me was Loyola Hearn. Loyola was a former Conservative minister in the Canadian government, but he was also ambassador to Ireland. And the two of us got together during the bailout, and we went to the governments, and we managed to get 10,000 visas for young Irish people, many of them who would have gone to Trinity as a 2-year visas, rather than seeing people languish on the dole during the bailout here, to open Canada for them. And Loyola played an absolute blinder on that. I'm delighted to have his support. There's a whole series of other, Tim McTiernan. I've got academics in it as well, and some journalists and various things. I have shied away from active politicians, because one thing I'm going to be my own person. So every piece of legislation, every resolution, I will look at it on its merits. I won't be told by a party headquarters how to vote, and I'll vote on my conscience.
That seems like something that you emphasize quite a bit in previous instances where I've spoken to you, where you'll be happy to speak at a conservative or right-leaning event on Monday, and then a communist event on Tuesday, and you'll talk to anyone, consider anything, yes, not tied down by allegiances to this group or that group.
Well, I carry my message, my basic message, which is I want to keep Ireland, I want to keep democratic control in Ireland. I spoke at the Conservative Party conference in 2018 in the British Conservative Party in Manchester. I've spoken at the Irish Freedom Party's conference. I've spoken at the Communist Party group in Belfast. I've spoken with Sinn Féin. I've spoken with Fianna Fáil. I'll speak with everybody, because, when I was working on the peace process, we had some fairly disastrous periods, particularly when people like John Bruton came in and said, you can't talk to this, you can't talk to that. And, it really retarded the discussions. So when Bertie Ahern came in, he said, go and talk to everybody. Bring your message over. And I'm never afraid to discuss my message, because I'm confident in my message. I don't have to hide from any group or feel intimidated by them. I will argue my message. And I say the same thing in the same places. So I'm not, tailoring my message for one or the other, I speak all the time about the need for Ireland to maintain democratic control of our future.
I know your platform is sort of centered around Irish sovereignty, and you'd be voting on legislation that pertains to that. And one big piece of news that's after dropping, I think just this morning actually, is the Taoiseach seems to be indicating that Ireland's 12.5% corporate tax rate is not as solid as previously indicated. Finance Minister Paschal Donohoe, he said under no circumstances will fight to the death for our corporate tax independence. But now the Taoiseach was asked about it, and what I read in The Independent was he said words to the effect of, well, we'll see, I'm not making any promises, which is not encouraging language for people who want to retain the current rate. I'm wondering, what do you think of that situation and the OECD's pressure on the Irish economy?
Well, I think there's no doubt there is strong international pressure to essentially make sure that the big tech pays a fair share of taxes, and there's a lot of there'll be a lot of sympathy around the world on it. But the bigger point is that and I use Brexit on this, that the Irish government regularly decide what's good for Europe, not good for Ireland, and whereas it would have been greatly in our interest to keep Britain close to the European Union, to give them a good deal from day one, to actually listen to David Cameron and Theresa May. We did the complete opposite to our national interest. Now, my fear is that, again, we will, if Europe comes calling, we won't be able to say no. I mean, just look at our fisheries, the terrible deal we have on fisheries. We have to learn to stand up for ourselves in a way that Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands, countries fairly similar to Ireland, will stand up for themselves. I'd have no confidence in the government's ability to resist pressure from Brussels. This present government is probably the worst I've seen in terms of defending our national interests. And, I certainly wouldn't put a bet on us retaining our 12.5%.
There was an advisory group of accountants who just submitted to the government their view of the situation, and they say that if the tax rate is raised to the level that the OECD is suggesting, we could be looking at 100,000 job losses, and Ireland has staked its whole economic model on FDI since Lamass, who the Taoiseach often quotes, by the way, and is happy to bring him up in speeches as this great leader of Fianna Fáil, but he seems to be kind of throwing Lamass's legacy and his economic policies under the bus.
Well, I think what you're having at the moment is you're having a huge amount of short-term policies. Essentially, the government knows it's unpopular. It knows there's very little chance of being re-elected in its present format. So it's throwing money at everything. Money that was borrowed that we'll have to pay back. It'll take a short-term, easy route to retain power or to hold onto its power. I think that in terms of if they increase the tax rate to a higher level, I think it won't affect that much of the present investments, but it will affect future investments. But in the longer run, I think the whole climate about foreign direct investment is changing. I think we have to change our model. We have to, foreign direct investment flows, according to the OECD and according to the UN, are slowing markedly, particularly out of the United States, where the political climate, not just from Donald Trump, but also from Biden, the Democrat, says, you're becoming unpatriotic if you start putting factories abroad. So, we've done very, very well on the FDI. But even as I said, the IMF have saying Ireland's model is not sustainable in the longer run. We have to change. Hopefully we won't change under the pressure of international people coming to us and sort of saying you can't continue at 12.5%. But we do need to change our model and develop stuffing like as I say, Norway exports 10 billion worth of fish products a year. Denmark exports 4 billion. Denmark has a tiny little sea around it. We export 300 million. We're losing huge amounts of money in the processing of fish products. We'll have to move more towards a more sustainable economic model here.
I believe last year, kind of in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, then US President Donald Trump was saying that America should be looking to bring its vaccine manufacturing home from Ireland back to the United States, and that he was unhappy. I mean, tax rates regardless, because of what you're saying, patriotism and, supporting your own native industries, that he wanted all of these companies to come back. And at the time, Leo Varadkar, as Taoiseach, was making all of these derogatory remarks about Trump, just snide little comments that really bringing him into conversations that were unrelated. And we in Gript, I was commenting on it at the time saying, this doesn't seem like a wise move at all when this man probably has the ability to pull the plug, as it were.
Yeah. The pandemic has taught us one thing, and it is changing in that when we suddenly found that we were totally dependent on China for PPS and things like that. Now, we have always sort of say we need food security. In other words, in Europe, in the United States, we have to be able to feed ourselves. But the security industries that we are in the future are going to be an awful lot of them in the medical field as well. And, we can't find ourselves at the end of a supply chain which works very, very heavily against us. And I think, the days where you could put all your insulin manufacturing in China is gone, because if something happens, you're going to be without it. My honest belief is that we've probably passed peak globalization, and there'll be more localization and regionalization of industry generally. And unfortunately, I think the Irish government have been a bit slow about grasping this, and we've been the poster child for globalization. And it's done well for the kind of macroeconomic area. But I think, again, as the IMF are saying, it's time to change. That people are not going to be at the mercy of China on a lot of vital industries. So and the United States is going to insist that they are able to look after themselves in an emergency.
Have you heard anything about this supply chain disruption stuff? We're hearing lots of rumors about how things like food and lots of just basic wares like toys, for example, and components in toys, certain microchips and so on, because of the disruptions caused by lockdowns around the world, that there's lots of things that come Christmas you might not even be able to get easily. And it's having these ripple effects throughout the global economy. Have you heard anything about this?
Yes, well, I mean, Boris Johnson has a kind of a phrase. It's like everybody got up at halftime and turned on the kettle. So what's happening is pink bill are all coming on stream at one time. But clearly the lockdowns have done massive damage to supply chains. The fact that gas production is way down, the fact that the transport industry has lost so many people in it, and it's going to take us a while. I mean, the big worry is a lot of this is yourself when you're going around, prices have suddenly rocketed up. Now the central banks are saying this is a temporary phenomenon. I'm not 100% sure, unless they keep inflation under control. It tends to run away with it, but. It's again a sign, and that if you have global supply chains, you're very vulnerable to disruption. And also this idea of last minute deliveries, which industry really loved for a while, but now you find suddenly the person who had 5 barrels of beer in the background is the one that can serve you, and the person who was getting the beer supply on the day is very vulnerable. So the risk factors have got to be taken in much more. Risk registers and things like registers of risks and things like that are going to change the system. But hopefully the present shortages are temporary. I think we've got to pay much greater respect to people who do long distance driving, pay them better and give them better conditions generally, because obviously an awful lot of people have left the industry. But hopefully it's a temporary phenomenon, Ben. I hope it's not a long-term phenomenon here. I want my turkey. I think, when I started the campaign, I thought it was a long shot in the dark. I am simply amazed by the amount of support I've got, as I say, right across the spectrum. And I think there is a need for, much more fundamental debate in this country about serious issues and about bringing the Oireachtas back to the centre of the debate, not sort of, turn it on almost like Frank's Pictorial Weekly to have a laugh at it. let's have serious debates about it. And I mean, the Zappone case brought some of that back, because it did bring the Oireachtas back at the centre. So I'm hopeful. I'm much more hopeful now than I was at the very start.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Ray. Really good to speak to you.